Sex is the life force energy that runs through us all. The link between sex, creativity, and the sense of aliveness is strong. Can you use sexual energy for your spiritual evolution? Or perhaps for emotional healing? Is it even possible? Clinical sexologist Dr. Martha Tara Lee will explore all these and more on the Eros Evolution Show here on OMTimes Radio and TV.
And hello, and welcome to Eros Evolution. This is where we talk about sex and spirituality. So today's title is Female Sexuality Without Shame. And I'm coming together today with my friend and a spiritual guide, Janet Chui. Am I pronouncing your name? I'm so sorry, I forgot.
It's all right.
So we're talking about the false ideas shown and taught to us about sexuality, relationships, and gender roles as women. So both of us identify as cisgender heterosexual women. But we hope, whatever we'll be discussing will resonate with you, bring up some of the taboos around divorce and dating. How do we move past from our past? And how can we evolve as people? Basically, bury some of the things that doesn't serve us. Bury, kill, repress, suppress, get rid of. I don't know. Okay, so Janet is the creator behind the Self-Love Oracle. It's a 44 deck and a book set for healing and self-empowerment featuring her writing and art. It's so beautiful. You need to check it out. After her experiences with motherhood, divorce, Tibetan Buddhism, healing, and the supernatural, so Janet actually supports people to heal through radical self-expression and creative expression. So she worked for the Eros Guide when working in the US, and has now started exploring the polyamory and kink scene in Singapore. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and is studying counseling psychology, and currently freelances in publishing art and teaching. So you can check out her website at Janet Chui. So that's Janet, CHUI.com. And you can find Janet Chui Art on Facebook and janet.chui.art on Instagram. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you. That was perfect. That was everything. I'm really glad to be here. But I mean, I know I have a lot to say about the topic today, but I want to hear your side as well, because as you mentioned, we have quite a lot in common. And in some ways, I don't have this conversation very often, you could say, because, like if you find other people in Singapore like willing to talk about this topic, they still tend to be like very guarded, which I can't say is a character trait I've had in my life. But
the topic of sexuality. So maybe give a bit more background besides the profile. For instance, I know you're a single mom who's divorced. So maybe you can tell listeners a little bit more about your personal life.
So exactly that. It wasn't something I anticipated for myself, because I think for most of us, when we go into marriage, we want to follow into I think what we saw in our parents' marriage. Like if they kind of got married, they stayed together, we expect that for ourselves as well. If they had a certain type of marriage, we expect that for ourselves as well. But for me, I feel as if my marriage was like a bit early, and I felt a lot of obligation to do it for various reasons. And when you go into it, it's like, when you go through life, a lot of it is like you learn on the go, right? Nobody gives you, or rather, even if there are textbooks out there on how to have a healthy marriage, sometimes you think you don't need it. So my marriage was such that it was definitely a learning experience, and I only had my examples from my parents to go from, which I have to say, like, wasn't very helpful. So in many ways, like what happened was that I had my daughter, and somehow pressures within the marriage were like, it was really hard to maintain after that. And not having the tools to fix it, even though we kind of tried, we even tried counseling. So that was really my first experience with counseling. It still headed towards divorce. So I've been divorced since 2015. But I have to say, I was kind of grateful for that, like, second chance, even though I didn't take the second chance immediately, but that second chance of kind of like exploring the dating scene, and in very different circumstances from when I first started. Like I was last single when I was in my early 20s. And then when I got divorced, that was like, I think in my late 30s. So it was a very different scene, and I was a different person. And of course, I needed to like still balance things with being a single mom as well. But I just found it like I was actually kind of grateful to have that experience of dating again, being single again. Like by the time I jumped back in, it was again like a new learning experience. And I think in many ways I was grateful because I was exploring in ways I did do the first time when I was in my 20s. Like in my 20s, I was still, in a way, grappling with a lot of the conditioning from either watching my parents' marriage or I don't know, peer pressure or whatever it is. I want to hear from your side as well, like what your experiences, in dating and divorce are.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Oh my goodness. So I want to say I do identify with the struggle that you just mentioned about. We kind of, when we get married, we close the door to certain aspects of ourselves. There's this perception, like as a married person, there are certain things that you should never do, and I think when one of the things that happens when you get married is that you kind of stop saying yes to attractive men. I think, like, you don't want to give off the wrong vibes, and you also
Yep.
know that at the back of your head it's like you're not available for that. So in some ways, like, we close ourselves off. So to close that, and then to then be single, to feel like, oh, now the world is my oyster, I can basically date or go after whoever I want. Even though it sounds really exciting, it can also be really scary, because if you close the door for so long, you don't really know how to open it up. You don't really know how to interact with people in that way anymore. And so I went through it twice, because I was twice married, and both my husbands, on hindsight, were really toxic, and I would even say narcissistic. They were both psychologically abusive towards me. And I totally take responsibility for the fact that I was also not very healthy myself. But I would have to say that the second time round, with my second marriage, I had learned so many things, but even then it was still not enough. So talking about that, there was this kind of like culture shock that I kind of had to go through. It's like I closed the door, and now I'm like opening up again, and I really don't know how to interact with people anymore. And so it is really scary as we go through transition, and it's more tiring than people think it is. So it's so important to be gentle with ourselves, to do things at a time and place that feels right for us, but also that we don't just become so comfortable with not doing anything, or like get caught up with this whole thing around, oh, I need to heal completely and fully, and then just like really sit on it for so long, become like inertia, when actually it's fear stopping us. So what do you think about what I just shared?
I connect with a lot of it, because I feel like I experienced what you mentioned, in that I also had that, I went through that phase of, oh, I need to heal before I can date again, which in a way I don't entirely disagree with. Like, I believe we should heal a bit before we jump, back into dating. I mean, because it can be quite crazy. You do have a lot of ups and downs, and of course nowadays, like, there's apps, but I remember somehow when I was starting out and I was in my 20s, so this was around like the early 2000s, like the noughties. I somehow resolutely, stubbornly didn't want to use apps. I don't know why I was so adamant about it. So in a strange way, you have to deal with these kind of like, during the healing process, I had to deal with these blocks with myself and actually ask myself the question, why was I so stubborn, like 15 years ago? Why did I insist on doing things a certain way? So it kind of like hammered home I wasn't the same person anymore. And this time I also was a bit more open and willing to learn, because if I really went back to like before my marriage and like my first experiences with dating, I was under a lot of like self-imposed rules. Like, okay, I don't want to use apps, and this person must be like this and like this and like this. I'm sure you have like your own list of, my partner must have all these traits. And to tell you the truth, I was actually I hardly had a list like the first time around, because, and what I can see now in hindsight was that the messages I was getting was that I should be thankful for anyone. That was really what I grew up with. And somehow it's like, and this is also where I want to hear from you and what I want to talk about. I kept being told that I was not the ideal like wife material, or I wasn't the ideal girlfriend material. Like I was either too outspoken, or I had like very unusual opinions in terms of, like I believe no one should be ashamed about sexuality. And of course, in your line of work, you definitely have the attitude as well. But I just didn't believe like you had to be this kind of like innocent, innocent virgin who just goes along with what your partner wants all the time. Like you should at least kind of know what you like. You should at least have certain standards. So in a strange way, like kind of my first time round dating and being in a certain dating pool and being an Asian woman, I really struggled with all these expectations because they worried me. And yet the messaging was also that, can you at least act innocent, or can you at least act more submissive, so that you will you don't scare all your prospects away. So that was my experience during my 20s. So it kind of almost like primed me and prepared me in such a way that, yeah, I was very afraid of looking at red flags. I was very afraid of calling certain things out about my partners, so much so that you are just almost like thankful that you find someone who commits to you. Yeah, that was my first time round. And what I was kind of happy with was that when I started dating again, and this was around 2018, 2019, like right before the pandemic, right? I knew I was a very different person, and I just like the whole submissive Asian female stereotype, especially for straight heterosexual women. I was definitely less willing to play with that the second time round for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. So many things resonate with me. I'm taking notes. So I want to say that I also did that. I also had all these self-imposed rules, and we kind of fall into the narrative of how we should be as good Asian women. And I just really didn't have a voice, and I didn't have my own personality. I didn't come into my own person and confidence. So I think because of that, what you said, not really be this innocent virgin. I think I intentionally wanted to be that innocent virgin, and I also intentionally played that role of submission, so that I can get a person like you mentioned. And really is I mean, on hindsight, like so silly, because of obviously it's not sustainable, but we also wasn't intentional, because it was all imposed on us for so long. For so long, and also it was so subtle, and we just kind of like pick up things that we don't even realize it's not it's not who we are and what will work, because of the lack of experience. And so it's only natural, and we need to be compassionate and forgiving of ourselves that we just didn't know better. We didn't intentionally do it.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I was curious about, because I try to remember, like, before I started dating my 20s, of course, we go through our teenage years here in Singapore. And now I have a daughter who is actually at that age where they're trying to do, where she's actually been through one round of the kind of like the sexual reproduction syllabus, and where it's kind of like the basics. And then I know that somehow in secondary school, they're gonna do this again. So so just as a contrast, I know that the kids now are actually getting it more, like having these things taught to them in class more than once, and it's also earlier than somehow I don't know, I draw a blank during about what happened during my secondary school years here. But I remember I actually went through a girls' school, and somehow in a girls' school, you are around your own kind more, right? At least for me, like you're around your own kind more. So in some ways, we had no, we were not shy talking about sex, or we were not shy talking about sexuality. We were not shy talking about our crushes from TV and everything. So in a way, I realized that actually a lot of my social attitudes, a lot of, the way I felt about like sexuality it was probably more informed by my friends from girls' school than any of the school syllabus. So in a strange way also, I think all of us, for some reason, we were really affected by the media. And then if I think about what was on TV at the time that we were in girls' school, it would have been Beverly Hills 90210. There was a Pretty Woman movie, which as a school we actually went to go and watch. Like there were actually like bus loads of classes going to watch it. But I don't know whether all of these things were good influences, because this was, I think, the early to mid 90s, and there was still, it's kind of like, yeah, they actually acknowledge sex. So you had teenagers or people in those movies having sex, but it's, for me, I saw it almost like a power tool. Like you have to use this to seduce men, or if you're the evil character or you're the slutty character, let's be very honest, it's like somehow the evil characters, or the characters who were less inhibited, were the ones that were not good role models. So I feel that in terms of like when we internalize that, oh, actually the good characters are virginal, or the good characters like don't want that was actually a lot of where we learned it. But of course the attitudes from our teachers and parents, I think they definitely influenced all of us. I could see how we were still very conservative, and the media was quite conservative. I don't like. Did we go to school around the same time? What was your experience?
Yeah, we're around the same age. So I want to say, regardless of what race, nationality, there is definitely a lot of media censorship and policing going around, because the media is a big influence of the way we think, feel, and believe. And so this, of course, all societies want people to be like fall in life, behave, do well financially, and so that you pay
Conform,
your
yeah.
taxes, conformity. So it's really about governing citizens. So when it comes to the policing around our sexuality, the moralization around it, what it does, it doesn't allow us to feel free and open and confident and expressive. So we need to grow ourselves, reparent ourselves, whether it comes from like the way we relate with people, and also the way we think of sexuality. So clients coming in to me, with all kinds of different messages around their sexuality and stating their opinions as a fact. I think that is something that we need to be mindful of. Everybody is on a different journey, but it's really important for us to start questioning the role of media, the kind of sexuality education we had or did not had, and what we can do to really grow ourselves. And so many people get stuck in, oh, I don't know what to do. This is how it is. A lot of people complain, point to the government, their culture, their parents, religion. I remember distinctly as my clients struggled with their sexuality, they became so angry towards their parents. And anger is a way of protecting ourselves, it's a way of playing victim. But I think it's really important to just move past it as well. And so I'm glad that I'm in a position where I can support people to grow into themselves and to let go of things that doesn't serve them. So I think also another thing around sexuality education is that I really didn't have much of it, and I'm very fortunate that I have maybe small glimpses of what a positive and the importance of sex in relationships. So even though I didn't get a lot of education, I did think of and anticipate a future where I grow up and am sexual, and it's going to be amazing and it's going to be good. Um, yeah, so I think that formed my curiosity and desire to learn more, as opposed to a lot of my friends who it was just fear-based. And because of the fear and the lack of practice and confidence and knowledge, it actually never really got better for them.
Right.
How about
Yeah.
yourself?
I like where we're talking about right now, because if I really kind of go back in time, it's as you said, we take in a lot of influences from around us, whether it's our parents, our educators, or our friends. So actually, I have to say, like, in terms of my upbringing, it was a bit unusual as well, because I felt as if one parent was very afraid of the topic, and then the other one kind of like almost went in the other direction. So in terms of like even my own exposure, I feel as if I was probably more exposed than most people by a certain age, and maybe not, and no, actually I have to say probably not all of it was healthy. um so in terms of like, I was already less, I hate to use the word, but I was less prudish. I was less fearful of the topic. And maybe because as someone who was like practicing art and really interested in looking at art, do you know how many naked woman paintings there are that are considered classical art? So in that sense also, I was less shy about like the human body. Like, I don't understand, even amongst my own peers, like, okay, if my mom is very squeamish about, the naked body, maybe it's a generational thing. That's how I kind of like rationalize what I saw from my parents, or at least from one parent. But then the other parent also had certain materials around the house, which I think I was exposed to too young. So, but one effect on me was that I was really not squeamish with the topic. I was not very squeamish with kind of like nudity the way my friends were as well, because I saw it in paintings all the time. So by the time I went to girls' school, and then I was in that crowd of people where they were very enthusiastically like sharing gossip, like, oh, can you get, I don't know whether you had these conversations, but do you think you can get pregnant like sitting on the toilet if there was a guy using it first? We were still talking about sperm and egg, but we were still grappling with how easy or not it was to get pregnant, and therefore telling all these like scare stories. And the weird thing is, those scare stories that my classmates and schoolmates were talking about, I also knew like I couldn't go to my own parents with those kinds of questions. So my lucky break in a strange way on the topic of sexuality was the fact that I actually found a book for myself that was really written for teen girls, explaining all these things. So again, I wasn't shy about it anymore. And in many ways, I think I probably knew more than like my friends after that book, and I probably knew more than my own parents as well. So that was how I lost my fear around the topic. And I'm actually curious, like, how did you even know you were going to be a sexologist? Like, you chose your path, I think, quite early compared to, I don't know, like for the longest time, I didn't know what I was going to do. But you seem to know.
It was unfolding as well. I didn't know immediately. The first 10 years of my career, I was in corporate communications. Then when I got my first big heartbreak through the divorce, I had to find myself. And that was when I realized my life calling is to support people. And I really wanted to support people around the aspect of their sexuality. So I went and got the training, and I decided to come back, start my practice. I was really pushed to do it because I was really unhappy with how the lack of sex education was doing a number on all the women that I was seeing around me. All my friends were having difficulties around their sex life. They were afraid, they were having pain, they were having phobias around their sexuality. And I was like, no, I want to put my stick in the sand and say I'm here to support people around their sexuality. And in order to do that, I needed to get the knowledge for myself. So really, that's how it started, like, about 15 years ago. And yeah, when I started, people were very negative about it and making fun of me. And I still get mocked at and harassed. But it's been worthwhile because I get to support a lot of people, and I do see the transformation in the lives of my clients. Yeah. Okay, so we have a break, and I will be back after this break.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Hi everyone, we are back, and today we're talking about female sexuality without shame. I'm with my friend Janet Chui, and she is so many things. She's studying counseling psychology and freelances in publishing, art, and teaching. You can find her at janetchui.com. So she can actually do, she's a spiritual guide, so she can actually guide you around your different aspects, different challenges of your life. Being a divorced, single mom now, and both of us just was chatting before the break about how it has been being divorced and the blocks around dating that we experienced, and what led to us, I guess, living in having lived in a bubble because of the lack of sexuality education and a lot of government censorship, policing the sexuality of people, where you are punished if you are sexually promiscuous, and how this shame perpetuates in so many levels. And coming back from break, I want to share this little story. It's so silly, but it's a very true story. When I was growing up, and I was watching drama serials, whether it's Korean or Chinese drama serials, a lot of times when the young maiden would get married, suddenly the next day she'll wake up with like a strange hairdo. And a lot of times they would look a lot less attractive from when they were young before marriage. From maiden to woman, I guess, and mother. And so they just have all these like strange, ugly looking hairstyles, and they look uglier, they look dowdy. And so I asked my mom, like, what happened? What happened to this character? Like, why does she have a different hairstyle? And my mom said, oh yeah, that's because she's married. So I always had this idea, like, yeah, my mom has pretty ugly hair, like she perms her hair and it just looks old and dowdy. And so I thought, oh my God, when I get married, I guess that's what I have to go down that road. I just have to have a new hairstyle and I start to look really like dowdy. So the day after I got married, I don't know why, for some reason in my head, I thought I would wake up with like this strange hairstyle. And I was relieved when I woke up that my hair didn't change. It's so silly to think about it, but there's kind of like this metamorphosis of feeling that marriage is not where you become a bigger person and you become the best version of yourself, but you actually saw yourself compromising and becoming a lesser of who you are and who you can be. And I had certain things with my husband at that time putting me down and making me feel like, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to shine. I'm supposed to let him shine. I'm supposed to support him. I'm not supposed to question things. And I'm just supposed to get along and just play happy and play nice. And it just didn't work after some time. So
Yeah.
how was it for you, Janet? Love for you to maybe debunk some of these misconceptions around divorce and marriage.
My goodness, like your story actually reminded me of how some of the things I grew up hearing were along the lines of, like once a man snags like a very attractive woman for their wife, then like it will all go downhill from there. And this was what I would hear like the grown up uncles and whatever talking about, like, oh, women get fat after they get married, like they don't have to take care of their they don't have to take care of their appearances anymore, and so they let themselves go. So in a very strange, it was kind of course now I do not like those remarks, because it very much was like putting the entire worth of a woman on how she looks, on her weight, on how well she maintains herself. And then everybody kind of had this half expectation that when you get married, yeah, it's really downhill from here. Like you don't have to look attractive anymore, and therefore the so-called bad wife is the one that, lets herself get fat or lets herself get ugly and all these kinds of things. So like I remember, I don't know why I was overhearing so many of these things from the adults around me when I was growing up. But the messaging was also that, if you want to keep your husband after you get married, you better stay slim, you better stay attractive, you better stay submissive, and if he cheats or he starts to pay other women attention, it must be the wife's fault. Like I remember kind of like hearing these conversations with the adults, so to speak, so much so that I really believe, like, yeah, it was subconscious, like it really seeped into me, and I think I had a lot of the same beliefs in my own marriage as well. So that was something that was like I feel quite unfortunate. One more I can also share my own story about hair in a very strange way, because when I was in South Korea for a holiday together with my daughter, the tour guide for our group was actually very confused. He was like, why haven't you cut your hair? I'm like, why should I cut my hair? It's like, you have a daughter, so obviously you're married. So over here, married women cut their hair so that it's around this height. And it's only the single women who have long hair. So I was like, I had never heard this before, but obviously, this was something you actually saw in your programs as well. But it's the conformity and the signaling we're expected to do like, if we are available, we have to look like this, we act like this. And even after we're not available, we're taken, we're married, we are still expected to act a certain way in order to keep the marriage intact. And it's very superficial things like our looks, as opposed to, the stronger foundations that I feel like you actually need in a marriage. So yeah, unfortunately, this was the messaging. Like after you told your story, I was like, oh, I remember there's other parts about what I thought adult marriage was. And unfortunately, the two of us, I think we can say reality was very different from the things that we learned.
Yeah, it's a little bit like what it's a little bit like playhouse. We are playing house, pretending like this is all the things, all the right things to do and feel. So we are debunking some myths around marriage, and I think a lot of people struggle because of the lack of sexuality education. Because sexuality education is not just about the act of sex; it's really about relational skills as well. And if we don't have the best of modeling from our parents, then often we are just left pretty much to our own devices and to learn through trial and error. And so, like I was mentioning just now, we do need to have compassion for ourselves, to have patience. And I think this is why it's really important to have conversations with people, and also to have podcasts like this talking about how it's all okay. It's really, really okay. Whatever is in the past can be in the past. So I really want to also ask Janet, how did you move on? Things basically the cookie crumbles, the bubble burst, and we kind of had this reality check, and the marriage was just not working, and we needed to get a divorce. So having been divorced, we kind of waffled through all this already. How did you move on, heal yourself, and led to the relationship that you are now?
Okay. So I think this is almost where the topic of shame is a good one to bring up, because I feel like it's another, like, divorce or a relationship breaking down is another one of those like shame based topics. Like people don't want to talk about, people don't want to admit that a relationship they were in failed or broke down. Like we don't, that some of these things are taboo, right? So there seems to be this if you have to talk about divorce, people want to talk about who to blame. And I don't know, like, again, having been through it, you are not, after a while, at least for me, there was a stage I wasn't interested in blame. I just wanted to be free again. I just wanted to be happy again. And I feel that with all these topics, self-compassion and compassion in general is just such a huge thing. Like, we need to acknowledge when we are suffering. We need to acknowledge when, maybe some things you need to kind of air out. You have to verbalize, you have to ventilate, you have to like get more learning in order to fix it. So you cannot shy away from the topic of sex, or you cannot shy away from the topic of sexuality, or you cannot shy away from like why the marriage broke down. So if you actually kind of like, I don't know, in many ways, you have to remove all the onlookers and the imaginary audience in your head that is judging you. You have to somehow find a safe space, or the counselor, or that kind of like safe friend where you can talk about these so-called taboo topics with. And it is true that, like, self-examination, I actually want this in a marriage, or I actually need this in a marriage, or I actually need this in my relationship, and I'm not getting it. The shame becomes not so important, because you just realize actually everybody wants to be happy, or everybody might need like the same things from their relationship. So even though I know that, like, among Chinese families or Chinese culture, like, divorce is so taboo or so shameful that you even see couples that, if they don't work or it's a very abusive relationship, divorce is so shameful that they'll stay in it. But for myself, I think the self-love and the self-compassion really was my way out. And I could, and even in the counseling, in the couples counseling, I was like, no, you can't blame any one person for something breaking down. There's like equal responsibility on both parties. And if you can be honest enough and kind of like have enough integrity to go, yeah, my fault was this one, but I don't know how to fix it anymore, or I couldn't have done better because I did the best with what I knew or whatever it was at the time, but now I actually want something different, then there shouldn't be any shame there. So that's how by the time, kind of the divorce came through, it was a huge relief. So that was my experience. And I have heard kind of different stories when I was dating. By the time you start dating in your 30s and 40s, like you actually start seeing other people with also their own experiences. Like we collected all these experiences and we start comparing. So in a very strange way, I suppose I'm moving on very quickly, is that when I went from divorce back into dating, but I did take a few years break, it was to almost like integrate all my experiences. I had to understand why things fell apart. I had to understand, first time round, where my lack of understanding was, where my lack of almost like not say lack of identity, but I didn't know what I needed well enough the first time. So that you go into your first marriage, you go into marriage a bit blind. You just think that if I submit, if I make the other person happy, if I stay attractive and I do all the things right, the superficial things correctly, then it shouldn't fall apart. But after it fell apart, of course you have to do your almost like your forensic, CSI stuff of where it went wrong. And I think I spent that time well, that by the time I went back into dating, I was a lot more self-compassionate. And I was also, in a strange way, less willing to compromise on certain things. I didn't want to repeat certain things from the first time. So that's where I was. That's where I was in about like 2018. Like, okay, there's certain things I won't tolerate again. And in a strange way, with the internet having a lot of resources on the topic, that I feel weren't around the first time around. Like people get more educated on things like red flags, boundaries, and there's also less stigma, at least by this age, right? There's also less stigma about, kind of like taking a partner for a test drive, so to speak, right? Before you jump into the committed relationship. Like there was less stigma now around sex before marriage.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
The world that we lived in has changed, because I think originally when we first of that generation, whether society is evolving, is that we were looking it through the lenses of somebody who had a very small life. And as we got older, we realized through knowing more people, through learning about more people's stories, that there actually doesn't need to be that shame around divorce. If you have had divorce in your family, then of course it's less of a stigma, even though nobody actually goes into marriage thinking that they'll have a divorce. But actually the lack of conversations around divorce actually contributes to the shame. So I wrote down several things. I like what you said about equal responsibility for the failure of the breaking down of the marriage. And I think what it's really important is, I think a lot of people tend to take on over responsibility. So having compassion, having this ability to say, I deserve better, I don't need to be doing this, I don't need to be rehashing it, I don't need to be beating a dead horse, I think it's really, really important. So what you mentioned, like going for counseling, maybe for listeners to consider, like going into support groups, finding people who are going through a similar situation, and getting the kind of reassurance that you didn't do something that is wrong per se. And what you mentioned, like learning from it, the lack of, like what is it that I could do better for myself and also for future relationship. So at this point, I want to just share like a short story. So because I had so much shame around divorce, and they say the law of attraction, you attract what exactly you need to hear. So what happened was I did feel like used goods. because I was the only person that I knew was divorced, other than one other person who was around my age, because I got married so young. I was 21 when I first got married. And so I knew nobody who actually got married so early in my circle, except for one person. And so what happened was, because I had all this shame around being divorced, so very quickly, the first person that I actually chatted with online, with the potential of going to a relationship, he rejected me immediately on the basis that I got a divorce, and nobody, he doesn't want someone to give up, doesn't want to be in a relationship with someone who would give up, and further emphasize the whole thing around my own shame around being used goods. So what happened was, there and then I made that vow. You haven't heard my story. You don't know what happened. But if you had heard my story, I don't think you would judge me to the extent that you are judging me now. And nobody deserves to be judged to the extent that you just judge me. And so I'm not going to let myself put out with this kind of nonsense anymore. Even if somebody were to judge me again, I'm not going to let that affect me anymore. And so what happened subsequently from that vow that I created for myself was that I was very surprised ever since that day of the pretty traumatic experience where this person was shaming me for being divorced. I didn't get any more shame after that. And for many years, I was shaming myself, didn't go to Chinese New Year, didn't want all my relatives asking about my marital status and feeling like a failure and loser. And it turns out that when I had a conversation with my auntie, she actually said the family missed me. And there was no shame whatsoever. I had projected, just by watching drama series again, that I would be considered less than, when in reality, nobody in the family actually felt that. So my bigger extended family was much more educated and much more accepting than I was of myself. And I never really gave them a chance to welcome me back into the family, and really connect with them during Chinese New Year. So for many years, like a good 10 years, I actually avoided Chinese New Year, thinking that they didn't like me. They would be asking too many questions. They wouldn't respect my boundaries. But it was definitely not true. So I just want to so many things that I'm writing down. So this whole story about refusing to be shamed, and also another tip for listeners out there is that so I'm going to just do a bit of summary. So let go of over responsibility, be patient with yourself, be compassionate, go and get a support, whether it's counseling, support group, people who are like you, people who will build you up, and also make the decision to not be shamed. And another thing I wanted to say is that it's really important to also feel that you don't need to relive your story, don't need to rehash your story. People ask you about why you got a divorce out of curiosity. You do not need to entertain them. You do not need them and their approval to validate your reason for getting divorced. You don't even need to share your story, because your life is your life. So it took me a long time, because nobody coached me about how to figure out how to answer when people say, in a party or some inappropriate place, strangers asking you like, why do you get a divorce? So over time and practice, this is what I developed. Like, I came up with these scripts, and so I'm going to share these scripts with you. One of it is, I'd love to share this story with you one day when I know you better. I'd love to share this story with you down the road at a later time, because I don't feel like the time, like this is a good place to talk about it. You can also share it's a long story, but I just want you to know that I'm doing fine. Because people ask out of concern as well, and all they need to hear from you is that you're fine. They don't actually need, in fact, they're relieved to not have to hear your story. So the shorter your story, the better it is. You can say things like, I was young. You don't have to go into the whole story. You really don't. You don't have to go into all the details. It's tiring on them. And also you need to let yourself know that you do not want to relive that experience, and you do not want to necessarily re-traumatize yourself. Because over the many, many, many years, I did get very upset, as I shared the story, because of their reaction. Their reaction made me upset, or their response made me upset. It wasn't a story anymore. It was their reaction. And maybe I don't want to go through that. I don't need their approval. So it's really important to be gentle with yourself, to not share the story. And then there came a point in my life where it was okay to share. And And I noticed that my story started to become less and less and smaller because I can talk about it without getting upset anymore as well. So what about yourself, Janet?
I'm like you, but I think the therapy really helped me in terms of, by the time it happened, I almost had like a one sentence, like I could give someone that one sentence and it would tell them enough. And of course, as you say, if you want to share the full version, you have to wait for that person to get closer to you. But I think my one sentence was something like, oh, it was just, I was carrying a lot of it, and until I couldn't carry it all by myself anymore. So that was like my one sentence, because for me, it was just too much work on myself. So one thing I kind of feel like in my experience, even studying counseling and looking at the people who go into counseling, it's so women are so overrepresented in that industry, where because like we care. I think some of it is because we were raised to almost like bear the burden of everyone's feelings, right? It's like relationships going well, the woman repairs it, or the woman tries to repair it. She has to do something to like please the other people. So the thing is, like, the funny thing is, once you go into learning about therapy or learning about counseling, you actually know about boundaries, and that's almost like what saves us. Like, we stop taking too much upon ourselves. So even within I think dating, I feel like a lot of like women again go into it thinking of how they need to please the other person, but we need to like sometimes step back and go, wait, the other person also needs to please me. Like, is this person giving me what I need, what I want? Like, is this going to make me happy? Or, it shouldn't just be like the woman making the partner happy. And I think we have to like break out of it. We have to break out that thinking. And that's really what helped me during the whole dating process of, I'm not the only one being vetted and judged. Actually, I'm also entitled and fully within my rights to see who is right for me, which means I also have to use my discernment on whoever I'm seeing and what I'm sharing with them. So it's like, yeah, I use my one sentence story for my divorce a lot, but sometimes you get into other people who are also very willing to share and be vulnerable about their past relationships. So if you find that person actually, oh my goodness, the conversations get very long because you suddenly feel as if you found someone else who doesn't have any shame about their past. And that is, for me, very gratifying.
Yeah. Thank you for all that. So I also want to like further expound on what you mentioned, like we learn from all these things, and this becomes part of our story, it becomes part of our life, and it's also part of our wisdom. You learn from having lived through it. And I really believe in forgiving yourself, forgiving your partner, but also not forgetting the lessons that we need to learn. So when it comes to dating, I want to say dating advice, not to overshare, especially for the start, to create safety for yourself, emotional safety, like I mentioned, like not reliving it, not re-traumatizing it. There's a lot of people out there who are looking for casual and fun, and basically like totally not wanting to go into a relationship because out of fear. So do what you need, take care of yourself, brush out on your safer sex practices, learn more about sexuality online, and really get support and coaching around dating as well. So we have to end the show. I'm so sorry, Janet.
No.
Yeah, it's
so much fun
really,
today.
Yeah, I know it's really when all it's really like gone very fast. So please check out Janet's website. That's janetchui.com, and you can follow her on Instagram and Facebook as well. So thank you so much, Janet, for such an insightful,
Thank you,
interesting
Dr.
conversation.
Martha.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and do stay tuned to Eros Evolution next week.
Bye. Thank you.